Hello, it's Gareth. This is Somewhere on Earth, and it's Tuesday, the 27th of February, 2024. And with us today is studio expert Ghislaine Boddington. Greetings, Ghislaine. And here we are.
Hello, Gareth.
Again,
Hi.
doing Somewhere on Earth. And just to ease us into the rest of the podcast, then, what have you been looking at these last few days, weeks?
Well, I'm deep in a whole new research project, actually linked to my University of Greenwich work and Kingston University, and it's all about conversational AIs that talk to you through phones and speakers. And so at the moment, with my my producer and assistant, we're looking at these AIs that are supposed to learn with you and talk to you and be natural and responsive. They've got emotional tones of voice, much more advanced than Alexa and Siri, apparently. But there is quite a worrying range of them out there. So we're testing out some. They're meant to help you with your mental health and other problems in life. So we're exploring those because they're not highly personalised. And, of course, that means they could very easily be giving wrong advice because it's generative AI stuff, you know. So
those hallucinations could be a problem.
Exactly. So sadly, the most popular AI companion is the AI girlfriend. Millions and millions of men now have AI girlfriends, and they can choose to have them text them numerous times a day, giving them praise and love all day long.
There you go. That's
Makes
what men
it a bit
like.
tough for the rest of us.
Okay, lovely. That says so much, believe you me. Ghislaine, fascinating. And let's keep an eye on that research here on the podcast as you get further and further into it. All right, let's carry on. Let's get into the podcast. And coming up today, we have a special one for you. In our midst, it's only the Wiki Guy, as even he describes himself. Yes, Wikipedia co-founder Jimmy Wales joins us. He's also founder and these days a trustee of the Wikimedia Foundation. And he has a newish project called Trust Café. And Jimmy never does things by halves, as we all know. In fact, he does them by fours, as he once told the New York Times. He said, "I tend to eat things in fours. I'll eat 4 nuts, 4 grapes, 4 chips at a time. I don't know why. It's not really a superstition. I don't think anything bad will happen if I don't, but 3 potato chips just doesn't seem right." Well, Jimmy's rule of fours will be alive and well in this edition. We've picked out 4 listener questions for the Wiki Guy. Questions like discussions of Wikipedia's moderation policies, the impact of large language models, and maybe a few questions of my own. Let's see. This is the Somewhere on Earth podcast. All right, well, let's jump in then, Jimmy. And in fact, I did say that I'd maybe think of a few questions of my own. I have to earn my keep somehow. Shall we start with Trust Café? I mentioned it in the introduction. So what is Trust Café?
Yeah, so Trust Café is a pilot project at trustcafe.io. And the idea is to take everything I've learned from the world of Wikipedia and of fandom and think about how to reimagine what a social network could be like with a model where the community is actually in control. So the idea is the most trusted members of the community have the ability to rate things up and down, but it isn't based on sheer numbers. It's based on being trusted in the community. And the idea is that the algorithms will promote content from trusted members rather than just whoever gets the most eyeballs and most attention. The idea is to say, look, in most social networks, there's a real incentive to make inflammatory comments, to get into big, huge debates, because that's what gets you attention. Let's change the algorithm so that there's an incentive to post thoughtful, intriguing replies and comments. So it's still, it's a little pilot project. We've got 2 developers, and we're constantly tweaking the software and improving and learning and thinking and talking to our community. But hopefully in a few years' time, it'll turn into something really interesting. In the meantime, I'm enjoying it, so that's all that really matters.
That's important. How do people gain trust then?
Well, it's pretty old-fashioned, really. In our community, it starts in a top-down way, sort of algorithmically. I see people in the community who I think are smart and kind and boost their trust rating, and they can boost other people's trust rating. And the way you get trust from other people is it's very human. It's post things that are sensible. Don't pick fights for no reason. Don't quote low quality sources, things like that. Everybody understands this concept. It's just that social media has traditionally ignored the whole concept, and they optimize for engagement and time on site and number of ad views and so forth. So it's a different approach that I hope leads to a different result.
And Ghislaine, you've been dipping in, haven't you?
I have, yes. Literally just this last week. So, but very interested. And I was very interested to see, and was just engaged in how I conceive as various elements of it that you've chosen from different places, different things, put into one platform. And that one platform, it's nice to have those all together in one place, yeah. So I will be playing into it. But what I'm very interested in is actually looking at this kind of emergence of networks, which, obviously has been in the pipeline virtually for many years now, since the early 90s, late 80s. And I was wondering what you can see out there in terms of those emergent dynamic networks and ecosystems that you've been involved in so long, knowledge sharing communities, which have participation, which have collaborative participation in them. So is the Trust Café really like a culmination of your experience on that to try and get us to this next level?
One of the things I've always believed is what I call community design, which is a combination of sort of rules in the community, but also the software that supports those rules. So one of the reasons that Wikipedia works as well as it does is the actual design of the software, the ability if somebody comes in and does something harmful, anyone can go in and revert it. And then the community elects administrators. So now we're back to rules and so forth, and they can block people and so on. And so it's a whole complicated system that has evolved over time to sort of achieve a certain objective. And, my belief with Trust Café is that we can take that kind of idea of say, let's design the software and the rules, and at every moment think about quality. Think about how are we going to promote quality discourse, how are we going to promote interesting people. And, you can't completely ignore some of the traditional metrics. So if you say, oh, well, we don't care anything about engagement, well, people have to like the site, right? So if people come back and use the site again and again, that tells you something positive or something negative sometimes if it's just like super addictive like TikTok maybe. But you want to also think about that and say, oh, I created the perfect social network. No one ever gets in a fight because no one ever uses it. And there's no toxic content because nobody's posting anything. So you've got to think about popularity. But really, how do you get there and also take into account community control and thoughtfulness and kindness and building out a space that people are like, you know what, this is a home. I like to be here. I felt bad about myself when I was on Instagram. I feel good about myself when I've been here for a year. I've met interesting people and I've learned new things, and that's good.
So the branches that you can go into, and it says my branches, and I haven't done this yet fully, but in my understanding of network culture and the emergent dynamics of networks, etc., will they be kind of like, are they like kind of hubs or clusters where a certain, holding the network together, and will they have kind of interaction between them too in the longer term maybe?
In the longer term, maybe. I mean, the closest analogy you might think of is a subreddit. It's a topic-based thing. So, for example, there's the Formula One branch, and there's one lovely guy, one of our early adopters, who posts every day about Formula One. I actually have become learned my fandom of Formula One from he's caught me up on everything, and so the idea is you can subscribe to or follow whatever branch you're interested in, and you go there and have a conversation. But obviously, there's a lot of interesting things to be done with topics that live near each other in some sense, and cross-posting and things like that.
So there's a real opportunity for people to be early adopters in this. You mentioned the guy who's really early adopter of the site, really interested in it, wants to get some Formula One stuff up. So it's almost analogous to the first 100 people to write a Wikipedia page. It's early days, so people can still shape how the whole thing's going to work out.
Definitely, and there's so far we've got a small community. We. Like right now, the way the software is set up, we don't even get indexed by Google other than the homepage. And that's because we're deliberately trying not to grow too fast. So I talk about it rarely. on a podcast here and there, and then I get some interesting podcast type of people coming in, and that's good. I have never tweeted about it. I'm just saying we need to grow the community thoughtfully and organically to try to get the base of something that could be really interesting.
Yeah, and is there a sort of technical side to that as well? Just because obviously it's expensive to scale a new business or website or app or what have you. Is that partly it? Because obviously you're not in a kind of ad-based revenue maximization model where you can just buy a chunk of servers at AWS and so on. So is that a kind of part of it as well then?
Yeah, I mean, there's some interesting things going on. So first off, we don't have ads. We have a voluntary payment model, so you can sign up to be a patron and you get a little badge saying you're a patron and all that. We're not even close to profitable. I pay for it for the most part, but we got lovely people who are supporting us. But what's interesting going on in the tech world these days is something called serverless, and the idea is to have functions as a service and services on AWS and Google and so on, where it scales down to zero if no one's using it, and it scales as high as you want to go almost instantly, which gets a small group of people out of managing servers. And I mean, I remember the early days of Wikipedia. I would literally order a stack of servers and drive down to the data center and screw them into the racks myself. We had to physically buy servers. Now we just get whatever capacity we need in the cloud as we need it, which means that the tech part of scaling should scale with the traffic in a linear fashion, and then the revenue should scale, hopefully, in a linear fashion if people sign up and pay, hopefully, if they think it's nice.
Money would be nice.
But for now, it's the main cost is the development cost.
Sure. All right. Jimmy, thank you. Should we have some listener questions?
Yes, yeah.
Like this one from Gowrie of Hiram, and she's going to mention you've got some other venture. It's encyclopaedia wiki something or other. Anyway, Gowrie has a question about that, and asks, why is truthful information sometimes removed from Wikipedia? I say this from personal experience, continues Gowrie. In January 2022, my husband, myself, and my son visited Savali, an agricultural site in Maharashtra, travelling from Hyderabad. As calculated by the filmmaker Chris Riley, this location is the equivalent place on Earth to the landing site of the Perseverance rover on Mars. Dr. Riley proceeded to add a paragraph about our visit to the Wikipedia page on the Perseverance rover. But that paragraph was removed within a short time from that page, and presumably because there was no coverage about it on our local media, and therefore it couldn't be verified. And then Gowrie goes on to say, our visit was covered by the BBC podcast Digital Planet, and also through an article written by Dr. Chris Riley on Medium, along with some photos of our visit in February 2022. The removal of the details of our visit from the wiki page isn't of much importance or consequence, but what about other important information that may be wrongfully removed? How will that be prevented? Asks Gowrie.
So this is fascinating, and I'm going to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but that's only because I was sent the question early. So I did a bit of homework because I thought this is an interesting case. So the first thing I would say is that when we think about an entry like the Perseverance rover, that is a encyclopedia article about the rover, about the scientific mission, about the space program, and all of that sort of thing. And probably this visit to a parallel point on Earth by some people doesn't really belong in that entry. It's not what people are expecting or hoping to find when they go to that entry. But I did ask myself, okay, well, for this place, I understand it's a small village, and I don't think, at least I couldn't find an entry in Wikipedia about the small village at all. That means possibly this is the most notable thing that's ever happened to the village, is the fact that it somehow corresponds as the sister point, you might call it. And that means in that small area, in that small village, that actually might be relevant, might be important. If someone is saying, gee, I'm traveling, I'm going through India, and I'm going through a series of places, and I'm in rural India, and I say, oh, what is this village? And I look it up, and I might say, oh, that's actually interesting. This is the parallel point, and there's some pictures of this visit these people did. So sometimes it is really about where does it go in Wikipedia. Now, I'm not sure it goes in Wikipedia at all. I'm not really sure on that level, but that's often the case. And usually, we have a lot of discussions and debates in the community. It's a constant dialogue, a constant discourse about what should be in Wikipedia, what shouldn't. And the most important thing that comes out of that is merely being truthful is not enough. Lots of things are true, but don't really belong in an encyclopedia. So the way we normally think about this is, could we have an entry? Here I just see a water bottle on the table. The listeners can't see it, but it's a Thermos brand water bottle. Could we have an entry about this particular water bottle on this table? Well, no, there's nothing interesting to say about it. Could we have an entry about the Thermos company? Well, of course, it's a big company. Could we have an entry about this particular model of water bottle? Well, maybe. Sometimes, a particular brand of shoe or a particular type could be interesting enough. But you definitely can't have an entry about everything that's true. And so then that gets us into a whole fascinating world, and there's hundreds and hundreds of pages in Wikipedia asking the question, what is notability in the sense of Wikipedia? One of the things which was identified by the question is independent, high-quality, third-party coverage, media coverage of some sort. And so they had that in this case, but that's not always enough. We also have to ask ourselves, is this relevant to the reader? So someone's showing up and they say, oh, I want to read about the Perseverance rover. They will be interested in where it landed on Mars. They're not so interested in the parallel point on Earth. But a small village, yeah, they might find that interesting.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Ghislaine?
Yes, no, I think it does. It does make a lot of sense. But I'm just to hit back to the question about what may be wrongfully removed. At this moment in time, we know there's a huge rising number of people who really want to change information to suit their own views. Yeah, whether it's a bias politically or culturally or whatever, gender or whatever. So I guess that must be complex for Wikimedia, maintaining a debate rather than getting pulled into kind of battleground of opinions.
Yeah, of course. This has always been the case, though. This is nothing new about the last few years. It seems that way sometimes, but it's nothing new for Wikipedia, and it's nothing new for the world. But of course, often people will come to Wikipedia, particularly when they're coming, they've never edited before, and they assume that Wikipedia is a battleground. And sometimes you'll see it described this way in a way that we inside Wikipedia, as the editors and the people working on it, really find annoying. If you come to Wikipedia with the idea that you're supposed to come and right great wrongs and fight for a particular perspective, and that somehow as the outcome of all the clashes, the truth will emerge, well, that turns out just to be not true. Like, if people come in and they just want to yell at each other, I mean, go back to Twitter. You're very welcome there. What does work is people coming in who maybe have a different perspective, maybe they have a different background, different sets of knowledge, who approach each other with kindness, assuming good faith, and saying, okay, let's work on this. So my classic example is a controversial topic like abortion, and you can imagine a kind and thoughtful Catholic priest and a kind and thoughtful family planning advocate, and they come together to work on the entry, and they can both understand Wikipedia is not going to say abortion is a sin, but it will say, according to the Catholic Church, this is the position on abortion, and the Pope has said this, and critics have responded that. And if you have people who are kind and thoughtful, they can actually work through it and get to a presentation that they're both proud of, to say, look, if you don't know what the controversy is, and you really want to learn all sides presented fairly, this is a great thing. You should read this. And it turns out even people who are quite ideological, if they are intellectually confident, they're actually comfortable with that. If you knew as much about the issue as I do, you would probably agree with me. Whereas people who are less confident in their ideas tend to be the ones who go crazy yelling at people because they're actually afraid that they'll be shown to be wrong, and so they want to yell to shut the other side up. So that is my sort of view of human nature and the view of the way these things work, and in practice it works out pretty well. So you do have to be careful. People do come in with organized agendas of various kinds, and then we also, we have a policy of following reliable sources. And so what does that mean? Well, it does mean if all consensus of all humankind is in one direction, we're probably not going to give the other direction very much space. And as we know, as a human species, we've gotten things wrong before. And someday we'll look back, and I'm sure if in an earlier era they had a very kind and thoughtful group of people writing an encyclopedia, they might portray, using leeches in medicine as a grand idea, when now we think probably not so much. Although I read recently that it wasn't as
becoming a thing again.
Yeah, well, it wasn't as crazy as we may have thought for a while. But we accept that as we learn and as things change, we will discover things about our common understanding of the world that were mistaken. That's fine. I'm completely comfortable with that. The alternative for us would be to equally host every kind of crackpot crank theory, and that doesn't really make sense. So I always say, for example, our article on the moon doesn't say, some say rocks, some say cheese. Who knows? That's not
exactly.
Neutrality, really.
Yeah, sure.
But if there's a legitimate historical conflict, I once met with a member of parliament in Lithuania who was comparing a particular entry in Wikipedia, and he was comparing the English version and the Polish version and the Lithuanian version. And it was about a battle between Lithuania and Poland. And he said, well, the Lithuanian Wikipedia says basically the Lithuanian perspective, and the Polish Wikipedia says the Polish perspective. The English Wikipedia, he's like, it's really good. It addresses what is a real historical conflict. There, in amongst historians, there's actually some complications around interpreting the evidence. And so forth. He's like, you would really understand what that conflict is about if you read the English version. And his question was, how do we get the Polish and the Lithuanian versions to be? And I said, give us some time, and also you can speak those languages, go and edit.
Yeah, do it. Okay, all right. That's a good example.
Yeah.
And there is, by the way, a Wikipedia article on medicinal leeches. So just
Great,
check that.
fantastic.
So there we are. Right, Jimmy, we have a question via voice memo for you now.
Oh, great.
Hi, this is Stefano Ghazali with a two-part question for Jimmy Wales. So my first part of the question is, how do you think generative AI and large language models will affect knowledge repositories like Wikipedia and Stack Overflow? And the second part of the question is, how do you think the open knowledge community will react to this, with the fact that large language models have a likelihood to hallucinate? So how can we validate the information that we're being given? Thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thanks for your question. Brilliant question, Stefano. Appreciate it. So, Jimmy, there you go. LLMs and hallucinations. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, Stefano, that is a great question. And it is really the question of this year, I think, as these models have become accessible to the public for the first time. And they're really amazing, and they're really deeply flawed at the same time. So when I think about Wikipedia and I think about Stack Overflow, they're very, very different use cases. And in fact, I think for Stack Overflow, I think there is a problem. So I'm sort of the perfect typical user of Stack Overflow. I don't write on Stack Overflow because although I'm a programmer, I'm a pretty bad programmer. But I like programming as a hobby. And whenever I'm going to do some programming, I get an error message. I Google the error message, and I go to Stack Overflow, and I read what somebody else had the error, and then people explain to them how to fix it and so on. Great, fantastic. Now I just go to ChatGPT and I paste in the error message and I say, can you explain this to me? And I get a very good explanation. And it tends to be quite good and not hallucinatory. It seems to be much better at tech questions than some other areas. It isn't always perfect, but even when it's not perfect, it will give me sort of, well, here's 6 things you should try. And I can go through them, or, here's how this actually, okay, it's pretty good. I find it very useful. Wikipedia is a different use case, but I do think there is a sense that for readers, in some cases, it's sort of the equivalent, except for the hallucination problem, which is severe. I always enjoy telling the story. One of the things I love to ask ChatGPT is, who is Kate Garvey, my wife? So Kate is not a famous person, but she's been in the news a bit, and she worked for Tony Blair for 10 years, and she's mentioned in several books, and she's doing work with the UN and so forth. But she's at that perfect kind of margin where ChatGPT sort of knows who she is, but sort of doesn't, and very confidently makes things up. So it once told me that she'd set up a nonprofit organization to fight for women's empowerment in the workplace. And she set it up with Miriam Gonzalez, who is Nick Clegg's wife, which is kind of plausible because we know Nick and Miriam, and Nick works in my industry now and at Facebook. And I showed it to my wife, and she said, I mean, that could have happened had we been at the right dinner party. Like, it's not... She in fact runs...
And that's just the scary thing about hallucinations, isn't it?
Yeah,
so let's bring this back to Wikipedia, what that means for you. Because I suppose behind that, and I guess where you're going with this, is, well, you could read a Wikipedia article that seems very convincing.
I mean, for sure. Yeah, exactly. So it can be very convincing. It's very plausible. And that's actually the scariest thing about the misinformation that comes out of ChatGPT is that it is so plausible. And so that's a problem. So for us, if we want to think about how we're thinking about it, how we think about large language models in the world of Wikipedia. So first, there's no sense that large language models can just replace the work of the Wikipedia community. In fact, it's not even particularly helpful because the areas it's strong at are already like huge Wikipedia entries. Like if you say, who is Barack Obama, it's going to give you a perfectly decent answer. It's more the things we're working on, the small village in India and things like that, where you don't really want it to make things up and you really want to verify and so forth. But I do think there's some interesting possibilities. So one of the ideas I've been toying with is consider a short Wikipedia entry with only 4 or 5 references at the bottom. Could you feed in that entry and feed in the text of the 5 sources and say, is there anything in the Wikipedia entry that is not supported by the sources? Or is there anything in the sources that probably should be in the Wikipedia entry? And if it can do that with a reasonable degree of accuracy, to suggest an edit to a human, to say, oh, well, this article says the person was born on this date, should you add that? And then you go, yeah, okay, that's a good idea. And would that be a fun thing for people to do? Because always with Wikipedia, it has to be fun to do. People aren't slaving away, not having fun. They're writing things they think are interesting. But if they find it useful and helpful, why not? That sounds kind of cool. Also, imagine scanning over all of Wikipedia and saying, find me entries that are both popular, so you would have to have a matrix of popularity, and seem biased. Okay. Because a lot of people who are working on Wikipedia are very interested in fighting against biased entries, but how do you find them? You know, we don't really have an easy method of measuring it. But if ChatGPT can say, oh, this contains a lot of biased language, then as a human you can look at it and you might agree or you might not. Maybe it's just misinterpreting, you know. So those are the kinds of things I think are worth exploring. And then also we're thinking about, you know, our search at Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia and you type Queen Victoria in the search box, it's going to be fine. You're going to find the article about Queen Victoria. If you ask a question, no, it's just going to find the keywords that you happen to enter. But what if you said, why do ducks fly south for winter? Well, you know that's in Wikipedia somewhere, but where is it? Is it in the article on ducks? Is it the article on bird migration? Is it somewhere else? Is it all of those? If it can read all of Wikipedia and not make things up, that's really important, and say, well, according to this entry and that entry, here's a basic reason with links to go and read more. That gives people a new way of interacting with this knowledge base that might be quite fun and might be quite interesting. So we've got our machine learning team who are, busy, looking into these things, thinking about what do they mean, how can we do it, what does it all mean? And, you know, one of the things is the large language models actually have a very weak ability to actually tell you where they learned something, because they're basically giant probability estimates of what the next word might be given a bunch of prior words. And so they've chopped all the data up into atomistic words, and then it's amazing that it works at all. And yet it does. And so sometimes, if you ask it how it made that, how does it know that, it will give you a source that it made up out of thin air.
Yeah. All right. Okay. All right, Jimmy, thank you. Right, now this one is from DK Mock, who says, Dear Somewhere on Earth team, I'm excited to hear that Wikipedia's Jimmy Wales will be a guest on the podcast. I'd love to submit a question for consideration. Here goes. I understand Wikipedia relies on financial donations from ordinary users, and I'm concerned about the viability of this going into the future. Those who depend on Wikipedia are most often the least able to pay, and the cost of living crisis, compounded by climate disasters, means many who'd like to donate no longer have the means. Here in Australia, continues DK, here in Australia, many non-profits are struggling to stay afloat. How can organisations that provide essential services like Wikipedia, Signal and Blue Sky find reliable, robust and ethical funding in an economically unstable future? Really enjoying the podcast. Keep up the good work. Jimmy.
Yeah, very good. Well, so our funding model is, we're a charity, a nonprofit organization. The vast majority of the money that funds Wikipedia comes from the small donors, which I think is very important. Sometimes people see the banner and they say, oh, why don't you just make Apple and Google and Microsoft and Facebook pay for it? And I said, let's think that through. I think our intellectual independence is quite important, and the idea that we depend for our resources on the general public helps us to stay on the straight and narrow in terms of thinking about don't be biased, don't go in one direction, don't, whatever. And so it's really important that that model has worked for us and is still working. So we run the organization in a very conservative way. I don't mean right wing. I mean careful. Yeah. We try to bring in more money than we spend every year and build up our reserves. We have a separate endowment fund, which is partly funded from our general budget, but also that's where we direct a lot of major donors into the endowment fund because it's one step removed from the content. And that it all works. I mean, right now we always have to take fundraising seriously, but we're okay. And I think the broader questions that you ask are constantly on our minds about, how do we keep Wikipedia safe in the event of a major economic crisis, worldwide depression or something like this? Can we make sure that we can weather a period of time? And the answer is, I believe, yes, we can. We've built up reserves and we're okay. Now, the bigger question about nonprofits struggling, that I don't have a simple answer to that. I wish I did. But we're lucky as compared to a lot of knowledge projects because we are so popular. So only a small percentage of people actually donate, but that's enough. So some of the other things that you mentioned, although I think Blue Sky is actually a for-profit, but the other things like Signal and so forth, they also ask for donations. They are funded in some cases by their founders who have a lot of money and things like that. But I think it's really important that, when you get that little message from Signal or whoever to say, could you support us? Yeah, chip in a few quid. And I think it's really important.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I noticed, I think this is up to date, that you're the 7th most visited website in the world and the only not-for-profit in the top 10, if not more.
I think more,
that
top
tells
50.
you
I'm guessing. There's nothing
That
quite like
which
lot,
I guess is DK's concern, and maybe that of many others. What a lovely funding model that makes us all feel very good about ourselves, but really is sustainable. And I think there, obviously, you put your case that it is.
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing it now for over 20 years, and. Oh, is it?
Post.com bubble?
Yes, it's over 20.
Yeah, it's 2001.
Yeah. So it's been nearly 25 years,
Yeah, it's kind of bedding in all right, I think. All right, final question then. This is either Jan or Jan Sale. I'm going to assume Jan, but it could be Jan. Here we go. I'm a long-time supporter of Wikipedia and have donated monthly for a number of years now to support it. I love the idea of a public global knowledge base, but there's a problem. I tried to write up and post a page about one science fiction author, fairly well known and has won a couple of awards. And I wrote up a long article about one of his sci-fi book series that I really love and hope that this would help others to find really good series and the sci-fi universe that he built. Unfortunately, I ran into a problem here. As the author had started by self-publishing, there weren't many other reviews or talk about it except to the places where he publishes, like, for instance, Audible for the audio version and Amazon, etc. for the book. So the Wiki person who looked into this and should have approved it just rejected it as it couldn't be 100% verified. As you can understand, I'm paraphrasing here, by the way, but as you can understand, says Jan, I'm very disappointed. And the problem is there's no way for me to appeal these things to a higher authority, as far as I know. So if you get to a reviewer that doesn't like what you've tried to write, you're kind of in limbo. So this has putting me off writing stuff for Wikipedia. So, which is a shame. Let's all hope that Jan will continue writing for Wikipedia. And my interpretation of that question, Jimmy, is it may be if the Wikipedia reviewer, the Wikipedian, happens to be really into that sci-fi author, there's a pretty good chance that page would have stood. I'm going to put it to you.
It's a great question. And, it's a problem that is very hard for us to solve, in a sense, because, so we have something that's fantastic, and it's gained traction outside of normal channels. So the books have not been reviewed by the New York Times. They're maybe not New York Times bestsellers, but they're selling well. And so there hasn't been much media coverage, and so there's no third-party sources. It's self-published work and so on and so forth. So it's hard for us to write a biography in that case. We don't know anything about the author. To even write about the book series, what can we really add from because we're not journalists, and journalism is really, really important. So there are cases like this that are actually really, they stump me because I think it's unfortunate, but I don't think the right answer is to say, well, anybody can come and write anything they like, because then you really open the door to complete chaos and a loss of quality overall. I'll give a completely different example that I think structurally, philosophically is really the same problem. What about in cultures and places, it's like in sub-Saharan Africa, where there's oral history, but not so much written down? How do we grapple with that? Because if there's no written down history, there's no editors deciding, judging books, there's no history written in the traditional manner, then you just say, how do you know this? Well, my grandma told me. Okay, well, that's actually knowledge, right?
Well, exactly.
It's probably valid, but it's hard to verify.
And on that basis, Homer would never have made it to have a Wikipedia entry. I just heard Homer.
Yeah. But, there's loads of things that I could say about my mom that are all true, but they don't really belong in Wikipedia. And so I think that's an interesting question, is what are the boundaries of what an encyclopedia can cover versus maybe a different type of work, a different type of reference, that's a more open-ended sort of encyclopedia of self-published authors, where you might say, actually, in that context, we're gonna open it up, and the references you need are your Audible sales numbers and your Amazon
I was thinking
numbers
that revising
like
the verification criteria, maybe to take account of new publishing
and
names.
this is within the community.
Possibly that would be definitely looking ahead at the next 10 years, because there are so many things that do not get an academic source or a journalistic source. So many things. I'm thinking about live performance. I work in from live performing background. Well, time-based work of all types, happens across an hour, 2 hours, and then it disappears, and it's gone. Yeah. Sometimes it's recorded, sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's a critic writes about it, but actually pretty rarely, because there's very little coverage for performance in the papers, etc.
And yet it's as culturally relevant as anything that may be more permanently
like the oral documentation,
easier in inverted commas to verify. It's a huge issue, but I think we should wrap it up there. We can carry on chatting in the subscription edition of this podcast. But final request, though, from Jan, wants listener number 47, as a Star Trek fan, says Jan. So that is subscriber number 47. So I like the Star Trek reference. 42 adjusted for inflation. 47. So really quickly, can we convene a very quick SUDS committee here? And Jimmy, maybe you could, even though you probably don't know what on earth I'm on about, but do you think, well, as long as Ghislaine agrees, if you say that Ghislaine does, you just need to say it's okay for Jan to have 47, but you can veto it. Okay, but, it's not a trick question, by the way.
It's a Star Trek reference? I thought it was Douglas Adams.
Well, the 42 thing is, but the number 47 is a kind of recurring joke and across quite a lot of Star Trek. Oh. I think that even the writers got bored of it after a while.
In fact, one of the things I joke is like my role in Wikipedia, I'm not the CEO, I don't work there. My role in the community is completely powerless constitutional monarch. But that does give me the ability to make decrees from time to time.
Oh.
So by the authority invested in me by myself, I decree 47 is okay.
Wow, I should think that's
Great.
very much made
As official as you're ever going to get.
That is okay. That seems to be validation there. So we'll accept that. Thank you, Jimmy. And folks, you can get in touch. The usual places, of course. Our email is hello@somewhereonearth.co. On WhatsApp, we're code 44 7486 329 484. We have Keziah and Dylan behind the glass for you this week doing the audio here at Lanson's Team Farner. Our production manager is Liz. The editor is Ania. We have had Ghislaine Boddington here to give us expertise and excellent company. And I'm some bloke called Gareth. That'll do. Thank you, Jimmy. And see you soon, folks. More in the subscription. Bye-bye. All right, deep breath, and let's jump into this subscription podcast extra. And Jimmy, let's talk a little bit about one of the entries, one of many on Wikipedia that, of course, has been had a lot of comment, lots of discussion amongst Wikipedians. And by the way, I'm not asking you to be the grand jury on this, as you say. You're a constitutional monarch with little power, but obviously interested in this. So we're talking about the Israel-Gaza, or should I say Israel-Hamas conflict, and or war, for instance. So that's a whole other discussion on Wikipedia, as it is in the newsrooms of many media organisations, of every media organisation as well. You know, the nomenclature around this really matters. Now, the BBC and Guardian on their websites both speak of the Israel-Gaza war. On Wikipedia, it's Israel-Hamas. And I know even to get to that nomenclature has taken up just pages and pages of comments amongst the Wikipedians. I'm not asking you for opinion. Well, you can give an opinion if you want about which you think it should be. But I am interested in how this reflects an ongoing, very heavily loaded, sort of controversial discussion around Wikipedia. And perhaps you can give me an idea about just some of the real discussions and passion that go into ending up with that all-important title for the page.
Yeah, so I'll first start by talking about an older example in the same part of the world. When Israel was building, some would say a fence and some would say a wall, there was a big struggle over what that would be called, because wall was being put forward by the Palestinians to evoke imagery of the Berlin Wall. A security fence was what the Israelis preferred to call it, which makes you immediately think of protecting people from suicide bombers or what have you. And so there was an interesting struggle. What do we call it in Wikipedia? And there was a fantastic discussion that went on for pages, as you can imagine, where people were really thoughtfully grappling with it. And a lot of different questions come to mind. Clearly, both of these terms have an agenda behind them, right or wrong. Both of these terms are used in the media, in different parts of the media at different times. And what was basically settled on in that case was a paragraph, every word carefully sort of fought over and discussed and chewed on to describe what it was and why there might be a conflict about what to call it. I would hope in this entry that you will have some discussion of that to say, you know, here's what it's called, but here's why, and here's some of the things that are going on. Because we don't regard it as a good thing for Wikipedia to take a side on something like that. But we do think it's a good thing to help people be informed about the question. You know, why would you want to call it one versus the other? What are the implications? What does that really mean? You know, and having not studied that particular one, although I'm going to go home now and study
Sure.
it because I find it very interesting. You know, I would say, you know, what we look for is what are quality sources saying? If there's a consensus there, we'll probably go with the consensus. What are the, I would say, moral, sort of human dignity implications of using one versus the other? And you want to be really careful about that, to be respectful to all innocent people. And sometimes it's quite hard. And actually, one of the things that's interesting, and when we think about the places where it's sort of hard in Wikipedia is where there is a binary choice. So normally, if we're going to write a paragraph or even a whole page, it's very fluid. We can adjust and we can think about it. And we can acknowledge the counter arguments and so on and so forth. Sometimes a photo, right? So imagine this is an uncontroversial example, but there's a photo of the Eiffel Tower on the upper right-hand side of the entry on the Eiffel Tower. And what if people get into a fight about which photo should be used there? Well, the problem is there's no compromise possible. You either have to pick this photo, which is sort of the daytime photo, or this photo when it's all lit up at night. And why would you pick one or the other? And you just have to decide one way or the other. Similarly, for the title of an entry, that kind of is like it's got to be titled something.
Yeah.
And, we have certain historical experiences and historical references, things that we tend to do. But, these things are quite tricky.
A tricky one, yeah. And I know that one of the objections among the community to it being titled Israel Hamas conflict or war was that there'll be people in Gaza who are not affiliated with Hamas. And yet, still that becomes the title of the page because others in the community said yes, but, and clearly in this case, it was the yes, but that ended up defining and that somehow consensus breaking out as to what the page should be called. But the historical conflict going back to 1948 between Gaza and Israel, that is the Gaza-Israel conflict as well. I've got it right here in front of me on Wikipedia. But as you say, Jimmy, it's a fascinating
That would be
example.
very interesting, yeah. Also, that's another factor, which is what has something been called for years and years and years, and when should it change or should it not change? So, we have this. I mean, because we have a very strong policy about biographies of living people, that we really do think a lot about human dignity and things like that. So normally, the name that someone is called in Wikipedia and the title of the page we use a policy called common name, like whatever they're commonly called. So the page on Prince, the singer, is titled Prince, musician probably, but Prince, to disambiguate from Prince, the term. And what his birth name was, I have no idea. It'll be in the article somewhere, but that's his common name. And then we have cases where people transition, sort of the trans issue, and they change their name. And we tend to do that pretty quickly. We do it as soon as there's basically one reliable source with the new name, simply because that's a matter of it's what they call themselves. That's actually really important, and it's a very emotional issue, and it's something that, clearly, someone's changed their name, a famous person. Well, it's going to be the common name soon enough, but we'll tend to do it quite quickly. And that's not taking a position on anything other than this is a human being, this is what they call themselves, that's fine.
Yeah, and that's good enough for us, yeah. So, Ghislaine, your thoughts are on the future, aren't they, around Wikipedia?
Yes, I'm always working on future stuff. So I was really interested to go a bit further with you on the potentials you can see, not just for Wikipedia, actually, for Trust Café, for, other things happening out there. Ultimately, say 10 years ahead, the possibilities of working with or merging with the new generative AI or ChatGPTs or AI assistants, as we started talking about at the beginning of the show. And whether also any thoughts you have about like a more XR Wikipedia or Trust Café, using AR or immersion domes because these are new ways of learning. They're coming into the system. I mean, even holograms now are coming into universities to do things. So
that's an expensive R&D behind that. I wonder, is that part of the roadblock here, Jimmy? Or?
Well, so in terms of large language models, things are moving very, very quickly in the open source world. And so we're able to do more than you might think using completely open source models that aren't costing a whole lot of money. There's still some training costs and things like that. But we're still very early in those stages. And so it's not really clear. I talked in the non-subscriber part, but now we're here with our friends, the subscribers, about ideas we have for how we might utilize this technology. And I think in the future that is definitely going to be the case. We're going to utilize it. But what we really talk a lot about internally is human in the loop, that it's perfectly fine We've been using human in the loop even for spell checkers. Like if you run a spell checking bot on Wikipedia, we still say a human needs to actually check that it's the right word, right? You can't just run a spell, because spell checkers sometimes get it wrong because they've misunderstood the sentence or whatever. So human in the loop is what it's all about. Now, you had a separate future-looking technological question about AR and VR and things like that. And it's fun to think about, but it's just unlikely. I think, sometimes the old version of that question is, what about video? Kids these days, they only watch TikTok. What about video for Wikipedia? And I'm like, well, kids also love Wikipedia, but also there's something about text. There's something about the written word. For collaboration, it's the easiest medium to actually, if you make a video and I think, oh, this video is kind of unfair, for me to edit your video is quite difficult. But if you've written a paragraph and I say, oh, this is a little biased, I can go in and tweak it and we can have a debate about it and we can discuss it and we can come to a compromise. So similarly with AR and VR, I'm not really sure what it would be like. Now, certainly if we move to a world where people are interacting with content in a different modality. So we've already had the move from laptop to mobile, and now well over 50% of page views of Wikipedia are on mobile, but the vast majority of editing is still on the laptop. But I've not actually tried the new Apple Gizmo, whatever they're calling it. I've seen people, sort of using it and looking at web pages and things like that. And I do think this isn't earth-shattering or anything. It's not a dramatic new world, but we will want to make sure, if that's how people start using Wikipedia, to make sure, is it convenient? Is the screen formatted well for that medium? If people get used to clicking by moving their hand, are we actually picking that up correctly? I don't even know what that would be like. But we've gone through a similar process. I would say 10 years ago, mobile Wikipedia was pretty terrible because it was just a shrunk down version of the main site, and then we made a mobile version and people hated it, and then they changed it and it got better and better. It's an incremental improvement. I suspect we'll try to be where people are always.
So I guess with AR, for example, which is coming into not necessarily big full-on headsets, but with glasses, say. Not for editing, maybe, but for actually viewing and searching and finding things.
I mean, absolutely.
Like
so certainly,
mobile,
if I had, glass. I was actually just outside your office here, and there's this sort of beautiful big archway and building. I don't know what it is, and I thought, oh, I wonder what that is. And if my glasses had Wikipedia, and I could probably click and immediately see what it is, that would be amazing. Yeah. Well, I remember when Google Glass came out, and it didn't do very well. I think the technology wasn't really ready then. And they were very insistent, and I think rightly so, that they would never put facial recognition into it. And I thought, oh, that's a disappointment, because I meet a lot of people and I can't remember who they are.
Yes.
If I could just get a little banner above everybody's head telling me who they are, and I can click it, I can read their Wikipedia very quickly instead of, often at a dinner party in London, I'll have to, who is this person? I think they're in the Parliament, but I'm not sure who they are.
Especially if people know you, and they're like, hey, Jimmy. And you're like, I know I've met you. But
I do think, the search stuff you were talking about in the main part of the show too, and being able to search in Wikipedia, asking a question, or rather than just keywords. Yes, so
definitely.
Definitely
I think
with an AI kind of assistance, an AR interface, I think would be very possible within 10 years or whenever. But will definitely be that kind of multimodality that this younger generation are going to look for.
My car has an app that's I don't even know who made it. It's not official from us, but it's a wiki app. And it uses your GPS coordinates of where you are, and it lists nearby Wikipedia, whatever is nearby that's in Wikipedia. And then you can click, and it will read that entry to you. And it is terrible. It can't read very well. And, if you look at Wikipedia, at the top there's usually parenthesis and a little pronunciation key, and it garbles through that. It makes no sense whatsoever. And, it's just, when I first found it, when I got the car, I'm like, oh, this is great. Look, Wikipedia in my car. Now you begin to say, okay, like, text-to-speech is really good now. The ability to ask a question to Siri or Alexa or something like that is much better than it used to be. Although my children still find Siri quite amusing because it's wrong so often. But we're getting there. And so then you say, oh, well, there's this huge, enormous database of knowledge, and you should be able to query it through a voice interface. Why not? And have it read to you. And indeed could potentially, we could learn over time that actually maybe what you want is a 3-sentence summary, AI generated, that says, oh, this is what the article's about. Would you like more? And, or here's the 6 other concepts you might be, where it's interactive in a way that replicates, but in a different kind of way, the experience on the computer where you see a link and you click it, that you somehow bring in those kinds of things. I think there's going to be a lot of interface changes on the web in general in a voice setting. And that's clearly relevant for Wikipedia because, when I'm driving, I listen to podcasts. I don't read Wikipedia because it doesn't make any sense. So
Yeah, so some natural language processing and advancements there. You could see going into that kind of that useful précis of what you need to know, when you need to know it, where you need to know it. I can imagine
exactly.
that. So finally then, and just in a minute or so then, if you can, what about things that keep you up at night, Jimmy? Is there anything troubling you across, because, I know we've spoken mainly about Wikipedia. We could talk about Wikimedia Foundation and so many other things, but just across the things that you do, and I'm thinking about, I don't know, some kind of troll bot invasion of Wikipedia that screws up all the articles and demolishes the trust, or oh gosh, where do we start? There are quite a few things to worry about out there. So are you, is there anything troubling you?
Part of what the way I've gotten where I am is that I'm a pathological optimist. So I always think everything's fine. So nothing keeps me up at night. I used to joke, the baby keeps me up at night, but my youngest is now 10, so she sleeps well. She doesn't cause any trouble. Maybe when they get to be teenagers, we'll see if that keeps me up at night. But no, I worry about democracy. I worry about the upcoming year of elections. I worry about, is the world ready? Because we've got all these new types of potential for misinformation, disinformation, new types of highly personalized political advertising. I've said to people, imagine, we all like to think about, what if there's a deep fake video showing Biden doing something terrible? I actually think we're probably ready for that. I think it would be discounted quite heavily and quickly by media, and people already know there's a lot of fake stuff out there. What I worry more about is sort of your Cambridge Analytica style campaign tactics, but on steroids, where they, a bot reads your entire social media post history, your LinkedIn, everything that can be seen about you, even as a private person. There's generally a fair amount online. Then adjusts the argument for your case. And so you get a robocall saying, I know you're interested in, or it doesn't have to say that, I know you're interested in, because that might creep people out. But it just starts saying, did you know my opponent in this local, what's that website where the people complain about the neighbors, next door, I think it's called.
Oh, yes, yeah.
But, read all of that and now robocall people and say, your opponent isn't going to spend as much on fixing that pothole at the end of the road as I am in a local council. And then the next says, your opponent's trying to raise taxes on the excuse of potholes because they know you've never said anything about a pothole. Like, they just can tell everybody a different story in a way that in the past in democracy, you had to find a way, as we've seen with very successful campaigns. Tony Blair, for example, won a landslide because he appealed to the middle and he appealed across the middle, so he got the left and some of the right and so on. Now, maybe you can get a landslide by telling everybody exactly what they want to hear.
Yeah, okay.
And it's hard for journalists to identify that because it's so fragmented. So that keeps me not actually up at night.
No, sure, yeah. You still sleep well, but that would be a worry. Yeah.
It'd be lovely if it was the other way around, wasn't it? That they were using it all to actually bring us positive and things that we need to know about, and that actually would help us in life in a personalised way, but it's just being used back to front.
I do think that's not there's this moment in time when the technology exists. It's probably too expensive to do that at large scale for local council races at the moment. But the ability to counter it and the ability for people to sort of say, oh, okay, hold on, this is probably nonsense.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. All right. And for what it's worth, my huge worry is just the amount of just nonsense information that is being created and needlessly archived on servers all over the world, and just Nevada valleys full of server farms that basically just have a load of nonsense on them, and it's going to be an environmental disaster, and the end of humanity will come about because we'll have just poisoned ourselves to death with this kind of just huge amount of junk nonsense data that we can't sustain as a society, so we'll just drown in our own bullshit. There we are. And on that happy note, but it doesn't keep me up at night, Jimmy, so I'm with you on that. Just an optimist. I won't ask about your doomsday scenario, Glenn. I'm sure you have many, but I think
it's
we
not
probably
far
need
from
to
yours,
go.
but it's linked to biometric harvesting.
my
Actually,
goodness.
mine is.
All right.
So, yeah.
There we are.
Well,
after such an upbeat podcast, we just needed 3 people to be a bit grumpy at the end of it as well. So, all right. Jim, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I always love interviewing you and having you on the podcast. Thank you. And
thank you.
You, Glenn. Right, last item of business, and then we really are out of here, is would you like a listener number, subscriber number to this podcast? You can't bestow it on yourself, but I think we can scrabble together a committee just to let it in if needs be. I mean, you could have 4, maybe. It seems to be one of your favourite numbers, but it doesn't have to be. It's available, but...
Oh, I can pick a number?
Yeah, sorry, I should have said, the whole thing is we just let our subscribers, listeners, suggest a number.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'll take 9.
Oh, okay.
Because
I actually need to check it's not taken. Sorry, Jimmy.
My mother's favourite
you're okay.
number.
Yeah, we've
She was
got it.
born on March 9th, and she'll be 80 this year.
Wonderful.
Oh, that's nice.
So
Okay.
I'll tell her, for your birthday, I made you a subscriber number.
Okay, well,
great.
I vote for that on the hastily arranged Suds committee. I think we just need casting vote from producer Ania in my headphones. We're going to give Jimmy listener number 9 in dedication of his dear mother. How awkward that would have been if we had rejected that, but it seems to have got through for some reason.
That's gone
right,
through.
no favouritism, I promise. Right, thank you, folks. We'll have more stuff, brilliant content for you next time. See us then, and take care. Bye-bye.